Zodiac Alchemy. 12 Tales of Cosmic Connection. Taurus. The Glass Conservatory. A Hood Eloquence original. Where the streets meet the literature. A note from Hood Eloquence. Welcome to Zodiac Alchemy. 12 Tales of Cosmic Connection. A journey through the stars like you have never seen before. In this special 12-part series, we dive deep into the romantic and sensual essence of the zodiac. These are not just love stories. They are soul blueprints. Each episode explores a high-stakes world where passion meets purpose and where the unique superpower of each sign becomes the key to a breathtaking resolution. From the fearless leaps of Aries to the soulful depths of Pisces, we have woven a narrative for every energy. This is episode 2. Taurus, a tribute to the beauty of being truly grounded. A story about what it means to find your peace not in stillness, but in the arms of someone who refuses to let the world convince you that love and freedom cannot coexist. Prepare for raw emotion, atmospheric settings, and a touch of the esoteric. Whether you are looking for a reflection of your own sign or a deeper understanding of someone else's, these stories are designed to resonate with the geek, the romantic, and the seeker in all of us. The earth does not argue, is not pathetic, has no arrangements, does not scream, haste, persuade, threaten, promise, makes no discriminations, has no conceivable failures. Walt Whitman, A Song of the Rolling Earth. You can't stay in your corner of the forest waiting for others to come to you. You have to go to them sometimes. A. Milne. Part 1. Chapter 1. The Weight of Staying. The rain came to Portland on the last Tuesday of August the way it always came, without apology, without announcement, as though it had simply decided the city had gone too long without being held. Elena Davis stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the apartment she was subletting from a ceramicist named Ross who was spending the season in Lisbon, watching the drops trace their slow and crooked paths down the glass, and she thought about leaving. She thought about leaving the way other people thought about breathing, constantly, reflexively, without examining whether the instinct was wisdom or wound. Her camera bag sat on the kitchen counter, already packed. It had not been unpacked in 3 months. She told herself this was efficiency. Jackie, when she visited last week, had looked at the bag and then looked at Elena with the particular expression she reserved for things she chose not to say immediately, which meant she would say them eventually, and they would land harder for the waiting. The commission was done. The photographs of the Portland arts community had been delivered, approved, and lauded in 2 separate emails from the editor at The Guardian who had commissioned them. Elena had done good work. She always did good work. The question was never the work. You're looking at the rain like it personally wronged you. The voice came from her phone, Jackie, on speaker, predictable as gravity. I'm not looking at it like anything. Elena Renee Davis. I have known you since Howard. I know what your face does when you're about to run. I don't run. What do you call it? Elena was quiet for a moment. Outside, a woman in a yellow rain jacket walked a dog who seemed genuinely delighted by the weather, tail moving in slow, ecstatic arcs. I call it following the work. The work is done, baby. Has been for 2 weeks. You're still in Portland because something is keeping you. A pause. Or someone. Elena did not answer that. She was not ready to answer that, which was itself an answer. She had met Julian Branch 6 weeks into her Portland commission, at a gallery opening Dean Ford had hosted in the Pearl District, one of those events where the wine was better than the art and the conversations were the real exhibition. Julian had been standing beside a steel installation with a glass of whiskey he did not appear to be drinking, wearing a charcoal linen shirt with clay still visible at his left cuff. And he had been looking at the piece with the expression of a man who was working out a problem that had nothing to do with the sculpture in front of him. Elena had photographed him before he knew she was there. It was a habit she had, capturing people in the moment before they performed themselves for a camera. The image was extraordinary. She had not shown it to anyone. Dean had introduced them. Julian had looked at her the way he seemed to look at everything, steadily, without urgency, as though he had all the time in the world and had decided to spend some of it here. Dean tells me you've been documenting the arts community, he had said. Not a question, but not a statement either. An opening. Trying to. 3 months in a place isn't enough to understand it. No, he had agreed. But it might be enough to begin to. That was Julian Branch in a sentence, slow, exact, and somehow managing to say more than the words contained. They had talked for 2 hours. About Portland and Houston, and the particular grief of being from a place that no longer exists in the form you remember it. About what it meant to make things with your hands in an age of digital everything. About his grandmother Rosa and her garden, and Elena's father Deacon Martin and the maps he kept in the glove compartment of his Buick even after GPS made them obsolete. He said you had to be able to read the actual land. Elena had told him. He sounds like he understood something important. He understood most things. I think I got it from him. The need to go and see. And the need to come back? She had not answered that one either. Over the following weeks, she had found herself at his studio with a frequency she declined to analyze. He always let her in. He rarely explained what he was working on unless she asked, and she found herself asking more often than she had anticipated, because watching Julian work was something that required language to process. The way his hands moved through clay with an authority that had nothing to do with force and everything to do with listening, as though he were not imposing a shape, but recovering one that had always been there. His studio was a warm, dense world, shelves of finished and unfinished pieces, the mineral scent of wet clay layered over older wood and linseed oil, light coming in from high windows that turned gold in the afternoon. He kept a sound system that played John Coltrane and Nina Simone, and occasionally, when he thought no one was paying attention, old-school Maze featuring Frankie Beverly. The studio was the most deeply inhabited place Elena had been in years, and that fact unsettled her in ways she was still working out. She had kissed him on a Wednesday, standing at his work table over a piece he'd been explaining, a series of interlocking hand forms, he said, about the difference between holding on and holding up. She had kissed him, and he had kissed her back slowly, thoroughly, as though kisses were also things to be made with intention, and when they separated, he had simply looked at her and said, "I was wondering when you'd do that. You could have done it." She'd said, "You needed to be the one to choose it." That was the thing about Julian Branch. He understood something about desire that most men she had known did not, that it had to be chosen freely to mean anything at all. Part 1. Chapter 2. What Clay Remembers. They had 3 weeks of what Elena privately called the good middle, that particular season of a new intimacy when everything is still discovery and the ordinary becomes incandescent. Mornings where she would wake in his bed, in the room above the studio, and lie listening to him move around in the kitchen below, the deliberate sounds of a man who approached even coffee with the same quiet intention he brought to everything. The smell of the city coming in through the cracked window, mingled with rain and street food and the perpetual green of the Northwest. Julian was not a complicated man in the ways she had expected. He did not perform depth. He simply had it, reserves of it, the way certain land has water deep underground, reliable even in drought. He asked her questions and listened to the answers with a stillness that, in the beginning, made her nervous. She was accustomed to conversations where both people were performing. Julian was not performing anything. He had a discipline about his body that was not severity but care. He rose early, moved through a stretching practice in the gray light before the city woke, worked with his hands for 6 to 8 hours, and stopped when his body told him to stop. He ate real food, cooked in his kitchen on Sunday afternoons in batches that lasted the week, collard greens and brown rice and roasted sweet potato, and occasionally a lamb stew from his grandmother Rose's recipe that smelled like a memory Elena didn't have but wanted. She photographed him constantly, some frames with his knowledge and consent, many without. She was building a record of him that she told herself was professional, documentation of an artist at work, and that she knew, in the part of herself she kept honest, was something more personal. The photographs were some of the best work she had done in years. They were also an argument she was not ready to make consciously, that here was a life worth pausing for. His brother Thomas came by on a Saturday morning when Elena was in the kitchen, barefoot in one of Julian's shirts, attempting to make sense of the coffee grinder. Thomas Hicks was 3 years older than Julian and built slightly differently, less the earth, more the architecture that sits on it. He wore his suits the way some men wore armor, and his face had the particular arrangement of someone who had spent decades protecting a younger sibling from himself and from the world, and was not entirely sure which had been the harder job. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Elena with an expression that traveled through several things in quick succession. "You must be the photographer," he said. "Elena Davis. You must be the brother. Thomas. Julian speaks of you with a frequency that is unusual for him." He looked at the coffee grinder, then back at her. "You want me to show you how that works?" "Please." He showed her. He also, over the next 40 minutes while Julian was still in the studio finishing a morning session, told her 3 things about his brother that Julian would never have told her himself, that he had not been in a relationship in 4 years. Not since a woman named Stephanie Williams had left Portland for New York and taken something with her that Julian had spent a long time relearning to live without, that he had started the Conservatory project, the glass-domed garden attached to the studio 3 months ago, around the time Elena arrived, and that the piece he was working on in the locked back room of the studio, the one he told visitors was not ready for viewing, had taken him out of his usual unhurried rhythm into something that looked, from the outside, like urgency. Elena held all of this information with care, the way you hold something fragile you did not expect to be handed. "Why are you telling me this?" Thomas looked at her with the direct, weathered eyes of a man who had given up on subtlety as a conversational strategy. "Because I want you to understand what you have in there. And because I've watched women walk through that studio and walk right back out again, and he lets them, because he does not chase what doesn't want to be kept. But this one," he nodded toward the studio wall. "He is making you something. And I'd hate for you to be already halfway to the airport when he shows it to you." That afternoon, Julian took her to the conservatory for the first time. It occupied the rear quarter of the property, a glass and iron dome perhaps 40 feet across, attached to the studio by a short passage that smelled of damp brick and old wood. Inside, Julian had built something that belonged to another season entirely. Jasmine climbed trellises along the curved walls. Fiddle-leaf figs and bird of paradise and deep purple bougainvillea occupied custom-built beds of dark soil. A stone path wound through the space to a central clearing where 2 low chairs faced each other across a hand-thrown ceramic table. Rain hammered the glass above them, heavy and rhythmic, and the sound inside the dome was extraordinary, enveloping without being overwhelming, the way certain music held you. The smell was the first thing that stopped her. Damp earth and jasmine, layered and dense, like the inside of the most beautiful greenhouse she had ever walked into, except this was not curated for aesthetics. It was curated for living. For being inside. For staying. Julian, she said, and could not finish the sentence. I started building it in the spring. I wanted somewhere the rain couldn't take you out of. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with that same unhurried attention, hands still clay-stained from the morning, and she felt something move in her chest that she could not immediately categorize. You built this. My hands and Lee's. Took about 10 weeks. A small pause. I think about you in here. When I'm working in there, he nodded toward the studio, and I need a place to put my mind when the work is hard. I come here in my head. Elena did not know what to do with that. She turned back to the jasmine on the wall, running her fingers along a cluster of small white flowers, and she felt the thing in her chest do it again, that particular movement, like a door opening that she had kept closed for a very long time. Part 2. Chapter 3. The conversation before the leaving. The flight notification came on a Thursday, 3 days after the conservatory. It was not a new booking. It was a reminder. She had bought the ticket to Accra 6 weeks ago, before the work was done, before the kiss on Wednesday over the hand forms, before the conservatory and Thomas's quiet warning in the kitchen. She had bought it in the way she always bought tickets, the way some people buy groceries, practically, against future hunger. Cape Coast, Ghana. A documentary project she had been circling for 2 years, about the women who maintain the fishing traditions of the Atlantic coast. Real work. Important work. Work she had pitched and won and committed to. She sat with the notification for a long time. Then she called Jackie. Accra reminder hit. I know. I saw your calendar. I've been waiting for this call. Jackie's voice had the texture of someone who had been preparing. Tell me what you're feeling. I don't know if I can do this. Do what? Go to Accra or stay in Portland? Both. Either. Elena stood and walked to the window. It was raining again, always raining, as though Portland had decided to make a point. If I stay, Jackie, I lose something. I feel it. Like that part of me that just goes. That just lifts and follows the next thing. If that part goes quiet, that part might be trying to tell you something different now. Or it might be sedated by a good man and a pretty garden. Elena. Jackie's voice was gentle but precise, the voice she used when she was done being patient with the performance and needed to speak to the actual person. You have been running since your father died. You know that. Silence. I'm not running. You are. You've been running since you stood at that grave in Houston and decided that staying anywhere meant the possibility of losing it. You've been treating every city like a rental. Every relationship like a sublease. A long pause. What if staying is the brave thing? What if that's where the real story is? Elena did not answer. Outside, the rain spelled something on the glass that she could almost read. She went to the studio that evening. Julian was working. She could hear the particular silence of his concentration even through the door, that dense quality of inhabited quiet. She let herself in with the key he had given her without ceremony 3 weeks ago, setting it on the counter with a simplicity that had undone her a little at the time. He looked up when she came in, looked at her face, set down the tool he was holding. He did not ask. He waited. This was the thing that made Julian Branch the most disorienting person she had ever been in love with. He never asked you to give him something before you were ready. He simply created the conditions in which giving became possible. She sat on the stool at the corner of his work table where she always sat. The studio smelled of cedar and clay and something beneath it both, something she associated now with specific hours, late morning light, his hands moving, Coltrane low on the speaker, the sense of being in a world that had its own interior weather. My flight reminder came. I know. He resumed working, not dismissively, but because Julian's hands needed to be moving when he was thinking. The Accra project. Yes. Important work. Yes. He shaped something for a moment. She watched his hands. You're going. It was not a question. It was not an accusation. It was simply the way he processed the world, by naming what he observed, without editorial. I don't know. I don't, she stopped. I'm scared. He looked up. Then, really looked at her. Of going or of staying? Of what staying means. If I stay, Julian, I have to be here. Actually here. I don't know how to do that without feeling like something is being taken from me. What something? She searched for it. My edge. The thing that makes me see. I'm afraid that if I stop moving, I stop seeing. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his tool entirely and cleaned his hands on the worn cloth he kept tucked in his back pocket, and he said, Come here. She came. He took her by the hand, that steady, clay-warm grip, and led her through the studio, through the short passage, into the conservatory. Chapter 4. What he made of her. The rain was heavier now, a sustained percussion on the glass dome above them, and the conservatory was lit only by the dim garden lights embedded in the stone path, warm amber points that made the space feel like the inside of a lantern. The jasmine was in full bloom. The smell came at her like a tide, damp earth, white flowers, and underneath it the particular mineral richness of well-tended soil, the smell of things growing because they had been given the conditions to grow. Julian led her to the back of the conservatory, past the chairs, past the ceramic table, to a section she had not seen on her first visit. He had curtained it off with a length of raw linen, and now he pulled the curtain aside. Elena stopped breathing for a moment. She had sat for him twice in the early weeks of their acquaintance, at his request. In the unhurried way he requested things, not with urgency, but with a quiet certainty that made refusal seem beside the point. She had sat, and he had looked at her, and she had assumed those sessions had produced the preliminary drawings she had glimpsed on his drafting table. Sketches. Studies. What stood before her now was not a study. The sculpture was perhaps 4 feet tall, rendered in dark clay that had been fired to a warm near black, a woman, her, sitting sideways in a chair with one knee drawn up and her arms wrapped loosely around it. Her head turned slightly as though she had just heard something beautiful in the distance. The piece had the quality of absolute stillness, but not the stillness of someone stopped. The stillness of someone completely arrived. The face was Elena's face, rendered not with photographic precision, but with something truer than precision, the essential shape of her, the particular quality of her jaw, and the fullness of her lower lip, and the way her brow sat when she was thinking. Gathered, but not tense. But the thing that undid her entirely was the expression. She had never seen herself look like that. She did not know her own face was capable of that particular arrangement, open and anchored simultaneously, as though the two things had stopped being opposites. She was looking at herself at peace. She could not speak. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Julian stood beside her. He did not explain the piece. He did not offer context or interpretation. He simply let it exist between them, the way he let most things exist, without forcing them into speech before they were ready. After a long time, she said, "When did you start this?" "The week after we met." "Julian, I saw this in you the first night. At Dean's opening. You were standing with your camera and you weren't performing anything, you were just looking. The way you look at things when you don't know anyone's watching. And you looked so still. I wanted to hold it." She turned to look at him. His face, in the amber light, with the rain above them and the jasmine around them, was the face of a man who was not afraid of what he felt. Not performing the absence of fear, not managing it. Simply not afraid. "Roots aren't a cage," he said quietly. "I need you to understand that. What I'm offering you is not a cage. It's not a smaller life. Elena, look what I see when I look at you." He gestured toward the sculpture. "That's not a woman who has stopped. That's a woman who has landed. There's a difference." She looked back at her own face in the clay, at the expression she had never seen in a mirror. "What if I lose my edge?" "You cannot lose what is built into your bones. The way you see, that's not because you're moving. That's because you're you." He paused. "And Elena, there is more to see standing still than most people see in a lifetime of running." The rain played on the glass above them. The jasmine breathed. She reached for him. He held her with the same quality he brought to everything entirely, without reservation, without the half-attention of a man whose mind was elsewhere. His arms around her were the particular kind of steady that is not inertness, but deep-rootedness, the way old trees are steady not because they do not move, but because their roots go deep enough that movement cannot dislodge them. She pressed her face against his neck and breathed him in cedar and clay, and underneath it the warmth of him, the particular human warmth of a body that labored, that made things, that was fully inhabited by the person inside it. "I'm not asking you not to go to Accra," he said into her hair. "What are you asking me?" "To come back." She pulled back enough to look at his face. He was looking at her with that direct, unswerving attention, and she understood suddenly that this was the most frightening thing she had ever been offered, not because it was a cage, but because it was the opposite, a door that stayed open. A place she would always be able to return to, freedom built on something solid. That, she realized, was what had frightened her most. Not that staying would constrain her, but that she might come to need it. "Julian. Yeah. I'm going to need you to be very patient with me. I'm a sculptor," he said. "Patience is the whole job." Part 3. Chapter 5. The language of hands. She did not leave that night. They stayed in the conservatory for a long time. She was not sure how long, because time in that space did its own particular thing, slowed or deepened or both. The rain maintained its steady conversation with the glass above them. At some point Julian had gone to the studio and come back with 2 glasses of the bourbon he kept for occasions that warranted it, and they had sat in the low chairs across the ceramic table and talked the way people talk when they have moved past the performance of themselves into the actual territory. She told him about her father's last months, the way Deacon Martin Davis had become very still at the end, this man who had been all movement and map reading and long drives to nowhere in particular, and how she had interpreted that stillness as loss. How watching him stop moving had convinced some deep, inarticulate part of her that stillness and ending were the same thing. Julian listened. He did not rush to reframe it or comfort it away. He let it be what it was. "That makes sense," he said when she was finished. "Just that." And somehow that simple acknowledgement, unadorned, went further than any reassurance she could think of. "When did you get so wise?" He smiled, a slow thing, that smile, but when it arrived it changed his whole face. "My grandmother. She had this saying. She'd say, 'Baby, the soil doesn't move and everything grows from it.' I didn't understand it until I was about 25 and standing at her grave." He turned his glass. "Stillness isn't the end. Stillness is the condition. Everything that grows, grows from something that doesn't move. Elena looked at him across the ceramic table, the amber light between them, the jasmine holding its breath behind her, and she thought, I have photographed 37 countries, and this is the most beautiful thing I have ever been inside. Later, much later, when the bourbon was done and the rain had softened to a murmur, Julian led her back through the studio and up the stairs to his room. The room was simple, as his rooms always were, the bed large, the sheets white and cool, a single lamp on the nightstand casting light the color of old gold. A bookshelf that occupied one entire wall, poetry and art history and earth science, spines worn with handling. On the nightstand, a small clay figure he had made years ago, abstract, a woman standing with arms raised, that he had never explained and she had never asked about, because some things in a person's life are theirs until they are ready to offer them. He sat on the edge of the bed and reached for her hand, drawing her close with the unhurried deliberateness that was his signature in everything. He did not rush. He never rushed. He moved through the world as though he understood that speed was often an avoidance strategy masquerading as efficiency, and that the best things, the real things, required you to be slow enough to actually receive them. He drew her down beside him and kissed her the way he had kissed her that first time on the Wednesday in the studio, slow and thorough, as though a kiss were something you made rather than something you did, an act of craft rather than impulse. His hands moved through her hair and along the line of her jaw with the same quality of attention he brought to clay, listening, reading, discovering the shape of what was already there. She felt herself release something. Some held posture, some readiness to leave that she had been carrying in her body so long she had stopped distinguishing it from her spine. It went out of her gradually, like a long breath. His hands, clay warm even now, even washed, as though the work had permanently altered something about their temperature, moved along her shoulders, her arms, tracing the architecture of her the way an artist studies a form he intends to render truthfully. Not possession. Not appetite alone. Something more considered than that. Something that said, I am paying attention to you because you are worth the attention. I am learning you because I intend to remember. She pressed her palm against his chest and felt his heart, steady, patient, that same quality, unhurried, absolutely present. Stay, he said, very quietly. Not tonight. Not just tonight. She heard the whole sentence in the one word. She answered him without words. Chapter 6. After the rain. Morning came the way mornings came in that room, through curtains that were just thin enough to let the light qualify rather than announce itself, a gradual brightening that made waking feel less like interruption and more like participation. Elena lay on her stomach, face turned toward the window, Julian's arm across the small of her back with the weight of something that had decided to be there. He was still sleeping. His breath was slow and even, deep as the rest of him, and she lay listening to it for a long time with a feeling she was trying to be honest about. Not trapped. Not constrained. Present. That was the word. She felt present in a way she had not felt in years, as though her body and her mind were in the same location, attending the same moment, not split between where she was and where she might be going. She reached for her camera on the nightstand. She kept it everywhere, a reflex, and she raised it and took a photograph of the light coming through the curtain onto the white sheets, not of Julian, not of the room, just of the light itself, diffuse and golden. The kind of light that existed only in the specific confluence of this place, this morning, this particular configuration of everything that had brought her here. It would be one of the best photographs she had ever taken. She would know that later. She would print it large, and it would hang in a show in Accra, and the description in the catalog would say, Portland, Oregon, August, and leave the rest to the viewer. She booked a return flight from Accra to Portland before she had showered. A round trip. She had not bought a round trip to anywhere in 8 years. The act of it, the simple, radical act of planning to come back, sat in her chest like a seed. She heard Julian in the kitchen below. The particular sounds of him, water, the grinder, the low percussion of a man moving through a space that fit him, that he inhabited fully. She went downstairs. He looked up when she came in. His eyes went to her face, reading it the way he read everything, with that patient, accurate attention. And something in his expression shifted barely, but she saw it, because she had been photographing faces her entire adult life, and she knew what it looked like when relief and tenderness and hope arrived in the same moment on a human face. I booked a return. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set down the coffee things and came around the counter and took her face in both his clay-warm hands and kissed her forehead, slow and certain, the way you kiss something you are grateful for. Welcome back, he said. I haven't gone yet. No, but you're already coming back. That's what matters. She put her arms around him and pressed her face against his chest, and outside the Portland rain was beginning again, patient, persistent, the rain that would be here when she returned, and the studio smelled of cedar and clay and possibility. And she thought about her father standing in a field in Texas when she was 9, showing her how to read the sky. You look for the color underneath the clouds, he had said. That's where the weather is really coming from. She had not understood then that he was also telling her something about love. Part 4. Chapter 7. The space between leaving and return. She left for Accra on a Saturday morning, early, the sky still dark over Portland and the air carrying that particular Pacific Northwest smell of fur and rain and cold concrete that she would dream about, she knew, at least once during the months ahead. Julian drove her to the airport. He drove the way he did everything without haste, without drama, present for the experience of driving rather than impatient to be done with it. He had made her coffee in a thermos for the road. He had also, without telling her, tucked a small object into the front pocket of her camera bag, a clay pendant, hand-formed, on a cord of dark leather. Abstract, but in the shape, she would discover it mid-flight, of a woman with arms raised. At the departure's drop-off, he got out of the car and came around and held her for a long moment. "Go do good work," he said. "I will. Come home. Home." She pressed her face against his neck one more time, breathing him in, storing it. "I'll call you when I land." "I know." She pulled back, looked at his face, this face she had photographed in her mind 100 times, that she would carry in the footage of her memory across an ocean. "Julian." "Yeah, the sculpture. Can I have it when I get back?" That slow smile. "It was always yours." Cape Coast was extraordinary. The work was extraordinary. She photographed the women of the fishing communities with the full weight of her attention and her art, the early mornings when they mended nets in the blue light before sunrise, the late afternoons when they carried the catch in basins on their heads with the stray-backed authority of women who had been doing this for generations, the evenings when they gathered and laughed and argued and told stories in Fanti that she couldn't follow but could feel in the rhythm of the voices. She sent Julian photographs that were not from the commission, small, private images, a baobab tree at dusk, a child's drawing on a cement wall, the Atlantic from the castle at Cape Coast, enormous and gray-green and ancient. He sent her back descriptions. Not photographs, he did not own a camera in any serious sense, but small, precise pieces of writing that arrived by text in the evenings, Portland time, which was her middle of the night. The conservatory had its first jasmine bloom of the season on Thursday. "I thought about you. Thomas came by. He asked about you. I said you'd be back in November." He looked relieved. "I'm working on a new piece. Series of hands in different gestures of release. I think about Ghana. I think about the women you're documenting, what it looks like when your hands have held the same thing across 100 generations." Lee finished the new trellis in the conservatory. "It rained all week. I sat in there Thursday evening and missed you in a very specific way." She saved every message. She had not saved messages from anyone in a very long time. She called Jackie from Accra on a Tuesday evening, sitting outside her rented room with a star beer and the sound of the neighborhood settling into night. "Tell me things," Jackie said. "I bought a round trip." Silence. Elena Davis. "I know. A round trip. To Portland." "I know. Baby." Jackie's voice had the warmth of someone containing a feeling. "Your daddy would be so proud of you." Elena looked up at the sky, different constellations here, a different orientation to the dark, but the same sky, the same connected dark that stretched all the way to Oregon, all the way to a glass dome full of jasmine and a man with clay-warm hands. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think he would too." Chapter 8. The Return. She landed in Portland in November, on a day when the rain had paused and the sky was that particular post-storm color, washed clean and luminous, the quality of light that comes after something has passed. Thomas was texting her from the car, per Julian's request. Traffic on the 205 shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. She waited at arrivals with her camera bag on one shoulder and the new weight of the clay pendant at her throat. She had worn it every day in Ghana, the small raised arms figure warm against her collarbone. And she thought about the woman in the dark clay sculpture in the conservatory, the woman with the gathered brow and the open expression, the woman who looked like herself at peace. She had looked like that in Ghana, she realized. Not all the time. But in the mornings on the beach, in the late afternoons when she sat with the fishing women and let the work be done for the day, in the quiet moments when she took out her phone and read Julian's descriptions of jasmine and rain. She had been landing in small increments for months. The flight home was only the final one. He was there. He had come himself, not Thomas, Julian, standing at the arrivals barrier in his charcoal linen and his clay-stained hands with an expression that was, for once, not entirely composed. She stopped when she saw him. Just for a moment. He smiled. That slow arrived thing. She crossed the distance between them, and he opened his arms and she walked into them, and he held her with the complete, unhurried steadiness of a man who had been patient because he understood that patience was not deprivation but deep faith. "Good work. The best. I'll show you everything. I want to see." She pulled back and looked at his face, truly looked, the photographer's look, the complete seeing, and she said, "I missed you in a very specific way." He recognized the words. His expression did something quiet and large. "Come home," he said. Part 5. Chapter 9. What the Earth Holds. There is a photograph, taken by Elena Davis, date November, Portland, Oregon, that won the World Press Photo Award in the portraiture category 3 years after it was taken. The image is simple. A man's clay-stained hands holding a woman's camera-worn hands across a rough ceramic table, a glass dome visible in the background, jasmine blurred soft and white at the edges of the frame. The title is Roots. When critics wrote about it, they used words like tenderness and permanence and the radical act of staying. When photographers studied it, they talked about the quality of the light, that particular amber warm note that comes from garden lamps at dusk inside a glass enclosure, and the way the depth of field places the background not out of focus but softened. The way memory softens things it wants to keep. Elena never told interviewers that she had taken it herself, using the camera's timer and a small tripod. On an evening in November when Julian had made lamb stew from his grandmother Rosa's recipe and they had eaten in the conservatory with the rain doing its patient percussion on the glass above. She never told them that what she had been trying to capture was not the hands. It was the feeling she could not fit into language, the feeling of being in a place that had been made for you to exist in fully, not smaller, not quieter, but more completely yourself than you had been in 8 years of moving. She never told them that Julian had not posed. He had simply reached across the table and taken her hand, the way he took most things in his life, steadily, without ceremony, as though it were the most natural gesture in the world. It was. She went back to Ghana the following spring for the second phase of the commission. She came home in August. She went to Oaxaca in October for a new project, and to Lagos in February, and to rural Appalachia in June for a long-form piece she had been circling for years. She always came home. Portland became the place her mail was delivered and her plants were kept. Julian kept her plants in the conservatory when she was away, and they thrived there, among the jasmine and the bougainvillea, in the particular quality of his attention. Portland became the place where the sculpture lived, the woman in dark clay, on its plinth in the corner of the conservatory, in the space between the jasmine trellis and the rain-facing wall. Portland became the place that made the rest of the world larger, not smaller. Her father had been right. You look for the color underneath the clouds. That was where the weather was really coming from. That was where the story lived. Thomas told Julian, on the occasion of their engagement, announced simply, with no performance, over dinner at a restaurant on Mississippi Avenue, in the way Julian did most things, that he had never seen his brother look the way he looked now. Like what? Thomas considered him with those seasoned, affectionate eyes. Like a man who got exactly what he was patient for. Julian turned his glass. That slow, complete smile. I told you. Patience is the whole job. On their first anniversary, November, the rain returned as expected. Julian took Elena back to the conservatory at dusk. The jasmine was in late bloom, the last of the season. The ember lights made the space gold and warm. The rain spoke in its patient language on the glass above them. He had placed a new piece beside the woman in dark clay, a man, rendered in the same near black, sitting in a mirror posture, one knee drawn up, head slightly turned, that same expression of absolute arrival. He had given the man her hands. She stood for a long time looking at the two figures, the space between them the precise width of a ceramic table, of an Atlantic Ocean, of all the distance that had ultimately become not absence but context, the necessary geography that gave the arriving its weight. She raised her camera. She took the photograph. Epilogue. A year after the rain. In the Taurus cosmology, the earth sign's greatest gift is not stubbornness, as the astrology books so often reduce it, it is permanence. The capacity to create a place, a presence, a love so thoroughly inhabited that it becomes a foundation others can build on. Julian Branch did not try to hold Elena Davis. He did not need to. He built a conservatory in the middle of a rainstorm and put jasmine on the walls and let her find her way inside. The most enduring things are not those that grip. They are those that root. The earth does not argue. Everything grows from it. Next in Zodiac Alchemy. Gemini, the double mirror. Where wit meets worth in a dance of duality. A Hood Eloquence original. Where the streets meet the literature.